Hello everyone, we'll be starting in a while. Meanwhile, just make sure that you have prepared the pre-event, you have went through the pre-event instructions and are prepared for the workshop. Thank you.
Okay, hello everyone. I am Elston. I am one of the OICs for Building Blocks 2022. Really great to have everyone here today. We are having the Introduction to SQL and Databases workshop hosted by Augustine and Daniel. Building Blocks is a by-student for student event where we hope to spread the love for computing. This year is our 6th edition, and previously we've been hosting this nationwide in Singapore. But this year we are doing the outreach internationally. So this March conference, we have students from Japan, and more international students will also be joining us in our further conferences. We are also having a few conferences. This first one is during March. So stay tuned to join FOSS Asia and the June flagship conferences coming up with many more workshops and competitions. We hope to see you there along with your friends. Do follow our Instagram at BuildingBlocks2022. BuildingBlocks22, and stay active in our Discord community too. Both links in chat soon. Now I will pass the time to Augustine and Daniel. Please turn on your cameras and interact with them and mute accordingly. Thank you. Augustine and Daniel, go ahead.
All right, hi guys. So welcome to this workshop where we'll be teaching you guys about SQL and databases. So I'm Daniel.
And I'm Augustine.
So before we get started, I just need you guys to download this app called SQLite browser, DB browser for SQLite. So I have some instructions here for you guys to follow easily to download the browser. So first, you just Google this name up here. And then you go to downloads, okay? So it's called DB browser for SQLite. And downloads, this is for Windows, so if you're on Mac, you just download the Mac version. So download accordingly. And you just follow the setup instructions that the app gives you. So I'll just go through the slides with a couple pointers. So like that's pretty much it. I'll wait to here for you guys to see the words, but I'll just give you guys a couple minutes to download this. After you guys finish downloading, if you guys could do like a reaction in the Zoom, then I can tell if you guys are done. All right, I see a couple of you guys are finished already. That's very nice. So I'll just give like 3-4 minutes more for you guys to download. Oh, and if you haven't seen the chat, we have sent a link with the files that we'll be using later for the database like tutorial. So there's a Google Drive link with 2 files in there, and you guys can download your files from there as well. I'll just send it again. So I'll just give everyone like 1 more minute, and then I'll go to a brief tutorial on how to use the DB browser. So like this app we just installed. So actually, I'll just open up my own app first. If you can see this. All right, so I hope you all are finished downloading. If any problems you guys have, you can ask in chat and we'll try to help you out. But if not, I'll just move on to this DB browser. So if you open it out, right, you see there's like a lot going on. But so up here, you can create a new database or open database. But since we already sent you a couple files, just go to open database and go open the files which we're using. So this is the file we are using later. It's basically like a small database of what a database of a workshop like this would look like. So if you go here, down here on this tab, we have database structure. So it just gives the overall structure of the database. And under this tables column here, you can see the different number of tables we have here. So up here, we have 5 tables for hosts, participants. Now this SQLite_sequence thing is just an inbuilt function in DB browser that lets us do this thing called auto increment, which Augustine will be going through later. Unused and workshop. So if you want to create a table, you just click create table here, and then you can make a new table here. But moving on, go to browse data. You can actually see the actual table of in the database. So you go under this drop-down table, you can see hosts, participants, unused, and as workshop. So yeah, this is us right here. And we go to the next tab, This is actually quite redundant for us because we won't be changing anything under here, so don't worry about that. And finally, execute SQL. So we'll be using this tab to execute the SQL statements, which Augustine will be teaching you guys later. So don't worry about it. So just the overall, this is the overall app. Here's the database structure, which shows you all the tables. Here's how you actually look at the data within the tables. And here's how you write statements to interact with the table. So yeah, that's about it with this app. So I'll just go back to the slides and I'll go through the overall flow of this workshop. So after this, we'll talk about what databases are, how to use a database engine, as well as different functions we can do with a database. So creating, inserting, selecting, updating, deleting, learning how to use the database with Python, as well as a conclusion and a little Kahoot quiz to test our knowledge from this workshop. So without further ado, I'll pass the time to Augustine, who will be talking more about SQL.
Hello. Wait, let me share my screen. Can you guys see my screen? Is it okay? Okay, so let's start with this workshop. So as Daniel has given you guys a brief overview on what we're going to cover, let's start with the first topic. So firstly, what is a database? Well, a database is an organized collection of data that is stored in that stores information in a logical manner. So storing data in a database will allow us to sort of access and manage that data. Okay, so some examples of databases in real life includes student records in your schools, supermarket inventory, and contact lists. So in general, there are two different types of databases, relational and non-relational. And in this workshop, we'll be covering more on the relational database, also known as SQL, SQL. So I'll explain more about SQL later on, but first, what is SQL? So a SQL database, it has a fixed schema, meaning it has a precise description of the data to be stored and the relationships between them. So yeah, in this for example, right, you have a table name and you have many fields for that table. So all the fields must sort of relate back to the table. And that's why it works well with structured data. Now for NoSQL, it doesn't use tables to store your data. You can use documents to store your data, but we're not going to be going through NoSQL in this workshop. So the common data types for relational databases are quite similar to those in Python. So you have your text, you have your integer, you have your real, which is basically real numbers, and your Boolean, which returns true or false, similar to that in Python. Now, attributes of relational databases. As mentioned previously, we can use tables to store data in relational databases. So what is a table? You may be wondering. Well, a table is a two-dimensional representation of the data that is stored in rows and columns. And each table has records and fields, which we'll be covering on later. So this is an example of a table. As you can see, we have the headings register number, name, gender, and class. All these headings are considered as your sort of your field or column. And if you see here, we have 1, 2, 3, and 4, all relating to different data. For example, register number 1 relates to the name Adam, who has the gender M, and is from the class 2A. So one row like this basically means a full record. So a record is a complete set of data with a single entity in the table. And in this table, we have 4 records because we have 4 full rows. And so a field, or more commonly known as a column, is basically the type of data about the entities in the table. So if we go back to this table again, we have 4 columns. So we have 4 fields. Now let's move on to keys in a database. Well, a candidate key is a minimal set of fields that can uniquely identify each record in a table. And it's sort of like a ID for your set of data in a database, and it can never be empty, or more likely it should never be empty. Primary keys are candidate keys that are the most important main key for the table. So your primary key basically tells a particular record from another record. So it has to be unique and cannot be repeated throughout the table. So let's take this table for example. Can you guys guess what the primary key is? Well, if you guessed the register number as the primary key, well, then you are correct, because the register number is in fact unique. Now, you may be wondering, the names are also unique, so why aren't they the primary key? Well, that's because if this is just a small table, if we were to have a very big table with a bunch of names, people may have the same name. So of course, there may be repeated names, and therefore the names cannot be the primary key. And the register number should be the primary key because it should be unique for every different name. Now, if you understand that, let's move on to secondary and composite keys. A secondary key is, quite simply put, a key that is not a primary key and not a composite key, basically. So a composite key, on the other hand, is a combination of 2 or more fields that can be used to uniquely identify each record in a table. And of course, we have another example for you. So can you guys guess what the composite key is? Now, if you guessed register number and class, you'll be correct. Now, why do we choose these 2 keys as primary keys? Well, that's because if you see over here on the left side, the register number, we can't really pick it as a primary key because unlike the previous table, we have reoccurring register numbers. So we have 2 1s, 2 2s, 2 3s, and 2 4s. So of course, that will not be unique anymore. And so we can't have it as a primary key. So we need to sort of use another key to help us uniquely identify each record in the table. So we would choose the class key because we have 2 classes here, 2 different classes with in each of the different classes, we have separate unique sort of register numbers that will help us relate back to the names or the records in the table. So let's take, for example, register number 1 and class 2A. Those 2 composite keys will give us the name Adam and the gender M. And if we take register number 3 and class 2B, we will get the name Ben and the gender M. So composite keys, basically what they are is they are like a pair or more keys that will help us uniquely identify each record in a table. So now for the last type of key, we have a foreign key. A foreign key is a field in one table that refers to a primary key in another table. So let's take these 2 tables for example. Can you guys guess what the foreign key for the teachers table on the right side is? Well, if you guessed the class as the foreign key, you are correct, because this class key for the teachers table references back to the main table and it references to the field class. So let's take our teacher, Mr. Teo, for example. He teaches class 2A. So if we use that as a foreign key and reference back to the main table, he would be the teacher for these 4 students in the class 2A. And for Miss Lim, she'll be the teacher for this class 2B. So that's it for the keys. If you have any questions, I can quickly take a look. Okay, no questions. All right, then we can move on. So let's move on to CRUD, which basically stands for create, read, update, and delete. And in SQL, they are known as insert, select, update, and delete. And these are the 4 sort of operations that will be zoning into this workshop. So that's it for the main intro into databases and SQL itself. So let's move on to using a database engine and why SQL. So SQL stands for Structured Query Language and is a standard computer language for operation and management of relational databases. So SQL is used to sort of interact with the database itself. Now, it is a widely used database engine, and there are many types of SQL databases, but for this workshop, we'll be mainly using DB browser for SQLite and Python idle for SQLite 3. So you may be wondering, what do we like sort of use SQL for in real life context? Well, SQL is the standard of American National Standard Institute, or has been the standard for American National Standards Institute in 1986, and was the international organization for standardization in 1987. And so it's quite widely used and known. Of course, we can use SQLite and databases for our application software such as web browsers or even your video games. So let's move on to interacting with our own database itself. Now, as Daniel has sort of introduced you guys to the DB browser interface over here, you can see at the top, we have new database, open database, write changes, and revert changes. And below that, we have the different headings over here, which Daniel has taught you guys. So what we want to do first is we want to open up the database that we sent you. So how do you do that? We go to File at the top left-hand corner, and we can choose Open Database. And from there, let's open up our BuildingBloCS_DB. So if you guys have any troubles opening up the database, just send it to chat and Daniel will help you out. Okay. If not, I will just give you guys a quick run through of this database. So if we go to Browse Data, we can see we have these 4 main tables over here. In the host table, we have these 6 records. Okay, in the SQLite sequence, you don't really need to know, you don't really have to interact with this table at all. For unused, we'll be using that for an example later. And for the workshop is, yeah, just the workshop names that are hosted in BuildingBloCS. So let's go back. And we have the first command, the create command. What the create command does is it basically allows us to create a new table. Now, this chunk of code over here may look sort of daunting, but do not worry, because if you were to go back into your DB browser, you see this like little button over here for new database. Oh, wait, sorry, below that. this button for create table. You can just click it. Sorry, let me make this a little bit bigger. And over here, you can create your own table. So you don't really have to memorize like this line of code over here, unless you're going to create a table in Python. Then for that reason, you have to know this code because you can't just open up a database in Python. So, okay. So what this line of code basically tells us is, it tells the browser, okay, that we want to create a table and then the table name. So we have to put these words in, create table. And then after this line of code, the first line, we have to tell the browser sort of what names of the fields we want to put into our table. So if you recall, these columns are fields. And if we go back to create a table and we want to insert fields, we can just put it in this sort of little table editing. But for the code, you have to type out the field name followed by the type, which is either if it's a text, an integer, a real number, or a boolean, okay, and the constraints for the field. So before we go on to create our own table, let's run through some of the key constraints for creating a table. So first we have the primary key and the foreign key, which we've run through over just now. So we just have the not null, the unique, and auto increment now. So not null basically just means that a value cannot be empty when it is inserted into the field. So every field, every record for that particular field that has been constrained to a not null has to have some relevant data. It cannot be empty. Now, unique basically just means like no two records can be repeated in the field. So let's say I want to put in a number 1 into my field. I cannot have another record with the same number 1 in the data. That basically is what unique means. And so auto increment, it acts like a count for your integers. So let's say I have my value is 1 in a field, okay? Sort of like if I go to browse data, let's say I have 1 over here. The next record I insert into my table, if I input the workshop ID over here, this heading, I'm not sure if you can see it, but it says workshop ID. If I set it to become auto increment, the next record I insert will automatically be auto incremented to 2. So 1 will be counted, will be like adding 1 to 1. So it just give you 2. It's auto increment basically acts like a count. So if there are no question, if there are any questions, you can just send them to the chat. And so let's try this example out. Let's create our own table now. So we want to create the table participants with the 4 relevant fields: participant ID, the name, the gender, and the workshop ID. So let's go ahead and try that out. I will run you guys through it. So what we want to do, we want to go ahead and create our table. Oh, it's a little bit small again. I don't know why. Okay, so at the top, you'll see a table and a blank line. So we want to put in the name of our table. So we want our table name to be participants. Okay, and that's good. So if you can see, all these like little word, any letter you type in, the database will help you type it out here. So this is basically the code that will be written, that we went through over just now. So you have this little button called Add Field. You can just click it, and you can see over here, you have a field which you can edit. So the first field we want to add is the participant ID. And if we go back to the slides, you can see that we have some constraints to set for the participant ID. But firstly, look at the data type. It has to be an integer. So if we go back, we can set the data type to be an integer, which is correct. Now for the constraints, we want our participant ID to be the primary key, and it has to be auto-incremented. So why do we want the participant ID to be a primary key? Well, it's because the participant ID should be unique for each of the participants. Remember, a primary key has to tell each separate record apart from each other. So if we want to set a participant ID as a primary key, we can just go over to the right. You can see there are these 4 small letters, not now, primary key, auto increment, and unique. So if you want to set primary key, we just click on primary key. And over here, you can see it has been set to a primary key. And if we want to set it to auto increment, we can just click the auto increment button as well. And at the bottom, you can, I can't really see it, never mind. So you have these 2 selected. Now, you don't really have to sort of select a not null if you have already selected a primary key as one of the constraints, because it is common for the database to already know that a primary key cannot be null. So you don't have to set the not null restraint. So now let's add in our second field. It should be name. And of course, the name is not an integer, it's actually a text. So we just select text. And we want to select not null, because we want everybody to put in their name. So we can't have like one participant ID relating back to someone with no name. That wouldn't make any sense at all. So let's add in our third field, which will be gender. And of course, we want to set it as a text again. Now we can just leave all of these constraints empty, because some people may not want to specify their gender, and we don't want the gender to be a primary key or even auto incremented at all. So that should be fine. You can leave it empty. So now let's add our last field, which would be workshop ID. And it is an integer. Now, if we go back to the slides, you can see that we want to set a foreign key constraint to our workshop ID that refers to the workshop ID in another table called the workshop. So how do we set a foreign key? Well, if you can see over on the right side beside the check the button thing, you have a foreign key sort of column over here. Now, if you want to set a field as a foreign key, all you have to do is underneath that foreign key, and like on the row of your thing you want to set as a foreign key, all you have to do is just double click, and there you can set a foreign key. So we want to set a workshop ID as a foreign key that's relating to our workshop table. So we just select workshop, and we want the workshop ID to be relating to the workshop ID in the workshop table. Of course, we don't want to pick anything else other than the workshop ID, because that would just not make any sense. The workshop ID can only be referenced to the workshop ID for another table. So we'll just have to pick workshop ID. Now, as you can see below, they really haven't written anything yet. That's because you need to click on an empty space, and then it'll be locked in. So you can either click on an empty space, or you can just press the return or enter button on your keyboard. And then at the bottom in the code line, you should see foreign key workshop ID references something. So that is good. You have successfully created your first table. So if you guys have any questions or anything, you can just put them in the chat again. And my dear partner, Daniel, will help you guys out. So let's move on. Now, what if we want to add items into our database? Well, the insert command allows us to add new records into the table that we have, into an existing table. Now, unlike the create command, we actually have to memorize this line of code over here because we have to type it out underneath the execute SQL sort of interface, because we can't really just, there's no button for us to insert data unless you want to just go into browse data and insert it right here with the new record button. But for large chunks of data, like let's say you want to insert a lot of data, we don't really want to do that because that's very tedious. So if we go back to the slides, you can see that this line of code starts off with insert into. Now we need to tell the browser where we want to insert our data into. So we want to insert into a table. Oh wait, hold on. Wait, just to confirm, you guys have created your table, right? Oh, if you have successfully created a table, if you go back to database structure, you'll see underneath tables, you have 5 tables now with your participants table and all your relevant fields. Okay. Hold on, I'll just give you guys some time to create your table first. And if you are not sure, you can just ask. Okay, I'll give you guys some time to sort of create the table with these constraints and the relevant data types for first. So I give you guys like 5 minutes. Okay, so for those of you wondering what is a foreign key in the browser and like what it looks like, basically if we go to a participants table that we just created just now, the workshop ID, hold on, wait, oh no, uh, no, how do I make this bigger? Okay, I got it. Yeah, okay, so if you go back, if you're still unsure on how to add in a foreign key for the field, I'll run it through again. So you can just double click on the space here. And you can see you have a foreign key for your table. So the first column, the first option here is all the tables in your database. So we want to click on workshop, and the next selection or the next option sort of thing here would be the fields that you want your field to be referenced to. So you want to pick workshop ID. Okay, and then you just click anywhere and then it'll show up there. Just click OK. All right, so I'll just assume you guys are done creating your first table. Yay! Okay, so let's move on to inserting items into our database. Now, the insert command allows us to add new items into our table. So we want to start it off with the insert into these two words, and then we'll need to tell the browser which table we want to insert our data into. So of course, we have to specify the table name. And this brackets over here with the column 1 name, column 2 name, you don't really have to put that in if you're going to insert for all the fields in the table. So you don't really have to specify the field that you're going to be inserting into. Now, after we add in the table name, we want to add in the word values, which will tell the table what values we want to add into which field. So for values, we want to add a value, of course, into the first field, the second field, and so on and so forth if you have more than 2 fields. Now, this is in like order. So we have to put in our values in order of the fields. So let's say our participant ID is the first field. So our first value that we add into this line of code over here has to be the participant ID. Now let's try this out. Let's insert a participant into our participant table. So if we go over to execute SQL, remember we need to know this sort of code. So we just put in insert into, and then the table name. So we want to insert into the previous table we just created, because right now it sort of looks pretty empty with no records. So we want to make it not so empty. So let's insert into our table participants. And then you can just press enter, which will bring you to the next line. So another good thing about this DB browser is that it is not like it doesn't really mind if you just continue your line of code on a different line. So you have this and use it to your advantage. So we want to insert into the table name, and then we want to follow up with values. So values. And if we go back to browse data, we can see that the first field that we're going to be inserting into is actually the participant ID. Was it? Okay, no mind. It's actually the participant ID. So you want to put in the participant ID 1 because it's the first item that we'll be inserting. So ID 1, and then we follow up with a comma to separate our different data. So now if we go back, the next field is name. So we'll add in our name. And another thing to note for writing out the code you have to put in the inverted commas, sort of like Python. You have to put in the inverted commas for strings. So we put in that our name. You can put your own name if you want. It doesn't have to be Betty. And then we follow up with another comma. Sorry. So another comma. And then if we go back, our third field would be gender. And so the gender would be M because Betty is a male. So you just put it in M, and then we follow up with another comma. And our last field would be workshop ID over here. Now the workshop ID basically tells us what this participant is currently participating in, like which workshop. So if we go to browse data, we go to the workshop table, you can see that the for workshop ID 3, the workshop is Intro to SQL. So of course, Mr. Betty over here is participating in the Intro to SQL workshop. So we want to put in a number 3. Then we just close the bracket. And then we can follow up with this little thing over here, which basically signifies the end of a line of a code. Now, if you're only writing one line of code, you don't really have to use it. But let's say you want to write more than one. Okay, so you just put that in. And you can write any line of code you want after that. So this will tell the browser that you're done with that line of code. Now, if we run this using this little button over here, right above this tab, execute SQL, we click on it, and we look at the bottom, query executed successfully. That is a good sign. Now, if we go back to browse data, and we go out to our participants table, Mr. Betty is our first record that we have inserted into our new table. Now, if we look at the second part over here, insert into participants, where we specify the different fields that we're going to insert into, you sort of realize that we did not specify any participant ID. Now, if you recall, we have set the participant ID to be an auto increment with an auto increment restraint. So we don't really have to put in the participant ID because it already is auto incremented, meaning it will be added by the browser itself. So if we try it out, let me go back. So remember, if we want to add in specific data for the specific columns, we have to tell the browser what columns they are. So without the participant ID, the first column that we'll be inserting into will be the name column. So name, comma, gender, oh my god, comma, and then the last one would be workshop ID. So just put a workshop ID here. And then we follow up with a close brackets. Now the values, we don't have to put in a participant ID, so we just remove that really quickly. Change the name to Daniel or Danny. Yeah, Daniel. Okay, and then gender M, and of course the same workshop. So if we run this line of code, query executed successfully, and we go back to our browse data, you can see that my guy Daniel has been successfully inserted into our table. So we don't really have to sort of specify the participant ID because it is already auto incremented by 1 for every record you add into the table. So you can just write this out, and that will give you, it will give you this nice little table over here. Now, if you guys understand it, why don't we try to add your name, for example, into the participant table? So let's try it out. Let's try inserting into the participants table our own name. Now, I'll let you guys try it out for a little bit. Give you guys another 2 to 3 minutes maybe. Now, if you have any questions, you can just ask in the chat. Okay, I will just assume that everyone is done in trying this insert command. All right, so if you have any questions, you can just try to direct message my other host, Mr. Daniel, on Zoom. So if not, let's continue on. All right. So now that we've inserted items into our table, let's try to select items from our table. And basically what the select means is that it will sort of retrieve data from the database itself. So it acts like a print statement in Python. So similar to the insert command, we have to know this line of code because we don't really have an option. Oh no, we don't really have an option to sort of find our data other than scrolling through the browse data thing. But if you have again a large chunk of data, that'll take quite some time. Now I forgot to mention that after you inserted your items, you have to press this write changes over here, which will basically ingrain your changes into the browser itself. Now, if you don't press this write changes, sorry, it acts like a save button basically. So once you're happy with your results, you can just press this. Now, if you're not happy with the results, you can press the revert changes, which will revert the data back to its last saved state. So just click this write changes button. Now let's go back to the select command. So when we want to tell the browser to select something from a table, we have to use the word select. So we start with the word select, followed by the column names that we want. Now, if you want to select everything, we don't have to specify the column names, and we can just follow up with an asterisk instead. So just be select with the asterisk sign from something. So the from basically tells the browser what table we want to get our information from. So we use this word from, followed by the table name, and you have to specify the table name. Okay. And we can either set a condition or we cannot set a condition. So we use the where command to set a condition. And then the order by basically is optional once again. So it can just be, it arranges your data that you get back either in ascending or descending order. So just be ordered by your column name, which you want to sort of arrange it by, and then ascending or descending order, up to you. And we'll go through that in more detail later on. So the common operators that we use in SQL, the comparison operators, the logical operators, and the arithmetic operators. Now the comparison operators and the arithmetic operators are very similar to those in Python, with your equal signs, your greater than, not equal, your plus, minus, divide signs, all really, the same as Python. Now the only thing that you may find different is the logical operators. Now we have the or, is, and is not. Now these four operators basically are quite self-explanatory. Okay, the or and the and is already in Python, and I think the is and the is not is also in Python. Now the only thing that is of main difference is these two lines over here. Now this basically means string concatenation, which means if you want to add a string to another string, you cannot use the plus sign like you do in Python. You have to use these two lines over here. So let's say, for example, I want to, let me just scroll down. Let's say I want to add, the word title or the string title with this into like my line, for example. I have to put the two lines, and then my code in the middle. And then if you want to put it in the front, you can just put it in the front like that, and then your sort of like column name or something, and then yeah, they will put the word, this string title with the thing in front of your column name. Now if you want to add something to the back of your column name of your string, you can just put your column name in front, followed up with this at the back, and that will add it to the back instead of the front. Alright, so that's it for the logical operators. And now let's try to select items from our table or database. So as mentioned previously, we use the asterisk to select all the fields from the relevant table. So if we go back to the browser, if we want to select, we need to start off with the word select. Okay, and then we want to select everything. So we use this asterisk sign, and we follow up with the word from, which tells the browser where we are going to get our information from, and in the table name. So in this case, I want to select everything from my host table. So all these 6 records, I want them to be returned to me. So just put the word host. If I run it, 6 rows returned. And if we see over here in this blank space that used to be a blank space, we have 6 records, which is 6 rows. So that is correct because I only have 6 records in my table, and I selected all of them. So I get back all of them, and that is very nice. Now, what if we don't really want all the fields, but we only want certain fields? For example, I only want my host ID from the table itself. Now we can just replace this asterisk with the host ID. Now we need to you need to remember that these are case sensitive. So if your field has a capital H and ID, you have to have a capital H ID, something like that. So let's say we only want to select the host ID from the table host. Now you can just run it. And there you have it. We only get back the host ID instead of everything that we asked for just now. So if we go back, we only get back this field instead of all the 5 fields over here. So now let's say we want to sort of select more than one column. So what do? We just add a comma and then the other field that we want to get or sort of like retrieve. So we just run it. As you can see, we have the host ID and the name that has been returned to us, which is these 2 columns over here and not all 5. So once again, we use the asterisk to sort of select everything from the table. Okay, and then we can change the asterisk to a field, a single or more than one field that we want only from the table. So if we just press this, we only get this. Okay, so yeah. So we go back. Now let's move on to the conditional select. Remember just now we had the little word here where. We have to use the word where to specify the specific conditions where we want to select the data. So we just put in the select, and then if we want to select everything, remember we use the asterisk from the table, and then the next line is where, which is a condition that we set to the line of code. So let's take, for example, I want to select the names of the people who are male. So if I go back, I will select name, okay, from host, the table host, and then I'll follow up with this word where, and I want this I only want the people who are male. So just put where gender equals to m. Now, if you see over here in the line of code, we have to put the inverted commas again because it is a string after all. So we have to put the inverted commas for strings. Now, you may be wondering why we don't put the inverted commas for gender or name. Well, that's because they are the fields that we are going to be retrieving from. So you don't have to put inverted commas for the fields itself, but you have to put it for the records in the table, the strings for the records. So if we run this, I get back only 4 results, which are all the 4 males in the host table, which is correct because I only want the males from the host table. So this is really nice. So let's say I want to have more than one condition for my select statement. So I can just follow this up with the word and and then I can specify my other condition. So let's say I only want the male host from the workshop with the workshop ID 1, for example. So I can just put and workshop ID equals to 1. Now we don't have to put inverted commas for this because it is not a string, it is an integer. So you can just leave it like that. So if I run this, I get only one result back, which is Ike over here. And that's correct because he is the only male with the workshop ID 1. Yep. So we use the word and if we want to add in 2 or more conditional selects for our statement. Now the order by, as mentioned previously, is to arrange the return data in either ascending or descending order. So let's try it out. Let's say I want to select everything this time. So I'll just replace the name with an asterisk where gender is M. Okay, that's my first conditional select. And I only want one conditional select. You can just put that. If I want to arrange it, we just follow up with the words order by, and then let's see, what do we want to order it by? All right, let's say I want to order it by the workshop ID. So workshop ID. And then at the end, we have to tell them which order we want, either ascending or descending order. So let's say I want ascending order. I'll just put ASC. Now, if I want descending order, I can change this ASC into DESC, which stands for descending. So for this example, I'll just put ascending. If I run it, there it will return me my data in ascending order of workshop ID. So it'll be 1, 2, 3, 3, which is correct. Now, what if I change it to descending? I get 3, 3, 2, 1. So again, that's correct. So once again, we use the order by command when we want to specify the specific order we want our data to be returned to us in. So now let's move on to the functions where we can use in SQL. So there are 4 main functions, known as the min for minimum value, the max for maximum value, the sum for the sum of all the values, and the count, which returns us the number of values that we sort of selected. So let's try this out. Let's say I want the minimum height from the table host. Okay, so let me just delete all this. So I want to select the min, right? And then I follow up with the brackets, min with the field that I want it to be. So select minimum height from the table host. Now if we run this, I get the minimum height is 100, which is correct. It is 100. Now, what if I don't want the minimum height, but I want the maximum height instead? I can just change the min to a max. I run this, I get 200, which is correct. Now, instead of min and max, what if I want the sum of all the heights from my table host? Well, I'll just replace the max with a sum. And if I run this, I get 920, which is basically the sum of all these 6 numbers up. So that's really helpful command. Now, what if I want to count the number of people in the sort of like the table host? So just put count. I want to count the number of names. So names with the word count. To count names from the table host. If I run this, I get 6, which is correct again, because there are only 6 records in this table. So the count will just we'll just count the number of records for the field and return it back to you. Okay, if that's okay, we can move on to updating our existing tables. All right. So the update command allows us to edit existing data and the values in the database. So for the update command, we want to start with the word update, okay, and follow up with the table name. And then we want to set, which basically tells the browser what you want to change your data into. So set the column name into the value you want the column to be. And we have to put the where condition because we want to specify where we want to sort of change our data in. If we don't have this where condition and we just put in this update and set these 2 lines in, it will set the entire column to the value you specified. So I don't think that's really helpful at all. Yeah. And also another thing is we have to remember and know this line of code because again there is no sort of button for us to update unless you want to update every single data manually. So similarly, we use the where to specify conditions to update data. So let's try this out. Let's say that in our host table, our little guy over here, Daniel, is not actually a guy. He is a female. So we want to change his gender to F. So we just go to execute SQL again. And if we want to update, remember, we have to use the word update. And then we have to tell the browser which table we want to update. So we update host. Okay. And then we follow up with the word set. Tells the browser what we want to change, what to what. So set which column we want to set. We want to set the gender column. So set gender equals F, because this is the new data we want to change the M from. So you want to change the M to F. So you put set gender equals to F. And if we just leave it like that, it will sort of update all of this to F. So I'll just show you guys as an example. If I run this, query executed, and look, everyone is a female now. Oh no, what am I going to do? Well, I can just press this revert changes. And boom, there's only 2 females again. So if we go back, we set gender equals to F, and we have to specify the condition. So where the name equals Daniel, because he is a female. So if we run this, query executed successfully, and we go back to our table, Daniel has been successfully changed into a woman. And that is correct because he is actually a female. So if we go back, let's try this now. Let's say I'm not actually 170 in real life. I'm like 200 centimeters, right? So I want to change my height to 200. How do I do this? I'll let you guys try it out following this sort of format over here. So I'll give you guys about 2 to 3 minutes again to try that out. Set my height to 200. Okay, so I'll just assume that all of you are done setting my height to its correct value, because if not, I'll be very sad. So if you've gotten this line of code, you are correct. No. Let's run through it once again. So I want to update the table host and I'll set the height this time. Height equals to 200 because, and we don't need the inverted commas because 200 is an integer, where name is my name, Augustine. So if we run this, okay, we go back to browse data and our height has been successfully changed to 200. So that is very nice. Now on to the last sort of function will be deleting data and dropping tables. So the delete command allows us to remove existing records in a table. So similar to the previous two sort of functions, we have to memorize this line of code because there's this delete record button over here. But let's say we want to delete more than one record, and if we were to use this button itself, it'll be quite long and tedious to do it manually. So we have to memorize this sort of code. So we start with delete from table name, and this tells the browser where you're going to be removing your record from, which table you're going to be removing your record from, and then the where once again to specify conditions to delete the data. So let's say I want to delete my little guy here called Rayan. So I go back to execute SQL, and this time instead of updating, I want to delete from my table host again, where the name is Rayan. So this basically tells the browser that you're going to be deleting the record of Rayan from the table host. So if you can see here, Rayan M2110. So this whole row over here will be gone if I type in this code, where name equals to Rayan. So this once again is the field, and this is the record in this field. So you remember Rayan for the last time. And if we run this, query executed successfully, Rayan is no longer in our host table because we have deleted him from the face of the earth, or more specifically from our table. So he's no longer there. And our host ID is 12346. But we have 5 records now instead of 6. So not using the where condition will delete all the records from our table. So remember to put in your conditions to delete. So let's say, for example, I have this unused table over here with 3 records, 3, 4, and 5. Now, if I were to delete from the table unused, and I don't specify a condition, what do you think is going to happen? Well, if I just run this, and you remember my data in the unused table, there's now no more data because I just deleted all the data. So we have to specify what and where we want to delete from. If not, all your records in a table would just be deleted. So let's just go back to host. So that's it for the delete command. Now moving on to the drop command. Well, the drop command allows us to delete existing tables from a database. Now the difference between delete and drop is that delete can delete one record, one or more records from a table, whereas drop basically deletes the whole table from existence. So when we want to delete a whole table, we just use the word drop table followed up by the table name. So let's say, now that we've deleted all the data from the table unused, this table is quite redundant and is taking up useless space. So we don't really want it there And so we want to drop the entire table because, it's useless. Now in database structure, you can just click on it, and there's this button for you to delete table, which will delete the whole table. But I'll teach you the code. So instead of delete from, we'll just put drop table, followed up by the table name. All right. Now there is no conditions for dropping because of course you can't have a condition when you're just going to drop the entire table itself. So this line of code, 3 words is sufficient. So if we run this and we go back to our database structure, you realize our 5 tables has turned into 4 tables where our unused table is no longer there. So we only use the drop table when we want to remove entire tables. Now we don't do that for our host table, for example, because we don't want to remove this whole table, right? All right, so moving on. Now, if you guys do not have any questions for the CRUD part of SQL, I can let Daniel take over. If not, if you do have any questions, you can just put them in the chat, and we'll try to help you out as best as we can. If not, I will hand the time over to Daniel, who will be talking more about incorporating SQL into Python 3 itself. So Daniel, please.
All right, hi guys. It's me again. So just let me share my screen. So I'll be talking about how we'll be incorporating SQL with Python. So like just now when Augustine was going through the CRUD, you might be wondering, oh, like why must we write all these code? Because you have like just press the delete table button there or like add field button there. Now this is because we don't usually interact with the database itself. So every day we are always interacting with databases through like WhatsApp or Instagram or like any apps you're using now. They all have databases, but you don't see yourself like typing in the code yourself, right? This is because you are interacting with the database through your app itself, which is why we have to learn this code, because with Python, we have to type out the code itself, and there's no like very nice buttons over there for us to press over there. So why Python, or essentially why must you use any other app? Because there's no customization or restriction in the browser itself, and not everybody knows how to use the statements. It's like you guys all learned all the new statements like the select, insert, or drop statements, but not everyone knows how to use it. So not everyone can use databases if they don't know that. And also, as you just learned about the drop table command, if everyone has access to the database itself, you have just one guy who's like, oh, prank you, and then he just drops the whole database, and like there'll be a problem. Which is why we use other apps to interact with databases. So in this case, you'll be learning about Python, how to use Python. So with Python, to connect to a database at first, so this is the first line of code you must always type if you want to interact with databases in Python, which is import SQLite 3. So this is just a library in Python that helps us interact with databases. And you see this second line called connection equals to SQLite3.connect. And in inverted commas is actually the name of your database file. So this little line of code just allows us to connect Python to the specific database which you are working on. Yeah, over here. And some little thumbs up or like important things to remember here is that in the inverted commas, you must have the .db extension. If not, it won't connect to your database and it won't work. So must always remember the .db. And also ensure that the database is in the same location as your Python file. So if we have a look at my file explorer, this workshop, you can see I've created a Python file in the same file as our databases. And this is because if Python does not find a database file or like the specific file you're looking for in the same folder as the Python file, we actually create a new database for you. But in this case, we're not trying to create a new database, so we're trying to interact with another database. So just ensure that the Python file is created in the same file location as your database. And also the connection.close statement at the bottom is just like an ending line for you to close the connection with your database so that other apps can interact with it, because you can't have like multiple apps opening the same database at the same time. So say like you're running a database on Python, you can't actually open it in the DB browser while it's running at the same time. So just always remember import SQLite free statement on top and the connection.close at the end of your code, and you wouldn't have many problems. Okay, moving on. How do we actually execute SQL statements within Python? So our connection variable is actually just the connection to our database. So we just use connection.execute. This .execute function just helps us execute the statements, if it's quite obvious from the name. And in the .execute function, we'll put our SQL statements, which Augustine has taught you earlier, in inverted commas. So let's move on to, as well as this .commit line. So this .commit line is actually like the save button in Python. So if you don't have this commit line, if you do anything to the database, it won't save to the file, it's only in your Python. So after you close your Python code, it just does nothing to the database, and that's not good if you're trying to update or like change anything in the database. So connection.commit goes after any command you execute with the Python code. Oh yeah, I put it here. Whoops. So yes, remember connection.close just ensures that the database file is closed properly so that there won't be any problems. And now, one of the reasons why you're using Python or any other app to interact with a database is because you can take user inputs and substitute it into the SQL statement. So let's say you wanted to delete a name from a file. Instead of going into the SQLite browser and doing like, delete, say, Rayan, like we did just now, you can just use a Python input. So the first line of code here is the input line. So input your name, so the user can input, say, Rayan. And next, you have two execute lines. So they do the same thing, but just two different examples you can use. So connection.execute. And here we have a delete line, which we have learned earlier. So it's delete from participants, which is that table, and the where statement, which specifies a name. So when name equals to curly brackets .format name. So this is just a simple Python .format statement where it replaces the item in a string. So if you're not very confident with Python, I'll just give you a really short example. Let's just say, hi, my name is curly brackets. Then I go .format. And my name is, say, Daniel. You actually print the full string with hi, my name is Daniel. So this Daniel substitutes into the curly brackets. On the second line, which is a F string, which is essentially the exact same thing, but instead of specifying the format, instead of having the format, you just put the variable name inside the curly brackets itself. So we go back to this, my idle shell here. Let's just say name is Daniel. And then we can do F string, which is with an apostrophe, like down here. So your open string and name. So you hear it's substituted my name into the string. So just some simple string substitution with Python. But this enables us to make very useful Python code to execute the SQL statements for us. And now with the SQLite 3 library, we actually have a special string substitution that does not work normally in Python, which is this question mark down here. So it's basically another form of string substitution, but instead of putting the curly brackets, you put a question mark where you want the string to be changed. You put a comma outside the string, and you put a tuple with the variable you want to change inside. So here, like question mark, comma, bracket name. So this just tells the function to substitute name inside the string. So just a couple of useful functions for us for parameter substitutions with the SQL functions. Now, this is where it gets a bit complicated, but don't worry, I'll go through real slowly. Because we use a select in DB browser, it just gives you a very nice table at the bottom, right? Like just shows you, oh yeah, you selected this and here's your table. But when you use select in Python, it returns this object called a cursor. And it's quite weird to read because I have this sample code below, okay? So we have the import statement, which just imports a library. Connection equals to SQLite3.connect, which connects our Python to the database. And now we have this cursor object, okay? So this cursor is just the execute statement. We wanted to select then all the items from host, where the workshop ID is 3, which is me and Augustine, basically. Now you would think, oh yeah, it would just print like maybe this in a string on a list. But when you print this cursor, you get this weird output. It's like, oh, cursor object at blah, blah, blah. So by thinking, well, how do you read from this cursor object? So there are actually a couple methods. So the first method is quite simple. It's just a for loop. Because the cursor is somewhat like a 2D array object. It's just that we cannot print the whole cursor out in one go. So instead, we can go through the items in the cursor, which in this case is the data which we are actually getting. And then we can go print out the data row by row. So at the bottom here, you can see for row in cursor, print row. And with this code, what it prints is just all our data, but row by row. So I'll go back. So it goes my data and then Augustine's data, which is exactly what we wanted to get from the database. Or next, we can use this fetch one function, which works with the SQLite3 library. So we have the connection, the cursor, which is selecting the same thing as just now. So we're using the same example from now on. So it's just the data of me and Augustine. So here we have row equals to cursor.fetch1 with empty brackets. So you have to have the empty brackets there for it to work. But what this does is actually, it's like a pop function. So like in Python, if you pop from a list, it will actually remove the item from the list as well as display it. So this is exactly what fetch1 is doing, which is returning you the first item on the list, or in your cursor, sorry. So see, we get my name first because I'm on top. But if I were to run this fetch1 again, you will actually get Augustine's name instead of mine because sorry, you have a question, I'll get to you later. Okay, one sec. You get Augustine's name instead of my name because you have already fetched my name from the cursor. So next we have the fetch all function. So what this function does, right, is actually with your execute statement, where like you select your data you want, you actually change all your data from the cursor into a list of tuples. So it's like another 2D array. So if you here have rows equal to cursor.fetch all, I print rows, you actually get this, which is all the data in tuples within a big list with both data sets. Yep. So finally, okay, this is where it gets a bit complicated, but this is where it's really helpful as well. So row factory. Now this statement actually configures the connection to retrieve data as a dictionary with the title being the key. So it's a bit confusing. So I'll just show you what a dictionary is first in case you're not sure. So let's say we'll make this dictionary with my data as, okay, so host dictionary is actually curly brackets in Python. So let's just say we have my name. As well as my workshop ID, let's say. And that's 3. So we have made this dictionary called host down here, okay? Now, if you want to get, say, just my name, is instead of using it like a list using the indexes, we should go host, like indexing, but instead of putting numbers, you put the key. So this is a key, and this is a variable. So you put the key, which is name, enter, and you see you get my name. If you wanted to get the let's say you want to get my workshop ID. You get my workshop ID. So this is essentially how a dictionary works. So I'll go back to the slides. Rule factory, it configures SQL the connection to retrieve dictionaries. So just now, if I use the fetch all, we get a list of tuples, right? But if you use fetch all here, you get an error because it's all dictionaries now. So with row factory, it's quite a complicated code, but it's the same for every time you want to use row factory. So under the connection code, we actually use this code called connection.rowFactory. So that's running the row factory command equals to SQLite3.row. So it's telling them to row factory every row in the database, which basically turns it into a dictionary. So we go to the connection.execute statement below that. We select star from host, and it's like, which is my Augustine and my names again. For row and cursor, instead of printing row this time, you can actually select your name specifically. So what this actually gives us is just the name. So row factory allows us to specifically choose which header of the table you wanted to print. So you want to print name here, you'll get all the names. So if you wanted the workshop ID or height, you can just change that easily and print it out. So let's just do a little hands-on application of the Python code to get us familiarized with it. So must always remember the import SQLite3. I'll go back to the slides. Okay, and then connection. Let me make this a bit smaller so you can see the slides. Okay, connection goes to SQLite3.connect, and our database, which in this case is called BuildingBloCS._db.db. And remember, it's always a string, so and now we have connected the database to Python. We can do any execute statement you wanted to do. So let's say we wanted to, so let's go connection.execute. Let's say you want to do a simple select statement. So select star, which is all items from, let's go back here and have a look at what we're going to select. Participants. Oh, that's quite a, okay, workshop. Wanted to select all the items from workshop. So let's do select star from workshop. Oh, maybe we didn't give this a variable. So let's go cursor. So this is actually the command here, which is the cursor. And remember, when you use an execute statement, it returns a cursor, but we have to read from that cursor. So there's a different ways of reading from a cursor. And I would use fetch all because it returns a list of tuples and it's very easy to work with if you want to do anything further through Python. So we can do rows equals cursor dot fetch all. We go print rows. And if you run this, hopefully there's no errors. There you go. We get all the data which we wanted to get from the database, which is, show you guys. So we get 1 C++ for newbies, 2 Python, 3 Intro to SQL and Databases. So just to reiterate, we have to do import SQLite 3 first, then connection. We must connect Python to the database. So it's SQLite 3.connect. And from there on, we can use any connection.execute statement with any SQL statements you wanted to do. So if I want to do update statement, go update. Let's think. Okay, say we wanted to add a title in front of workshop title, right? So like if we wanted it to say like title is name, right? You can actually just do update. Or we do update. First, you have to choose the table we want to update. So we do update workshop. Okay. Oh, and in Python, to make it look neater, you actually can do enter. Sorry. You can actually make it into separate lines. So enter here. And then you put a plus out here. And it acts as a new line underneath. So it makes it neater. So we can do set workshop title. Because that's what I wanted to change. So we're updating from the table workshop. And we're changing the title. Okay. And you wanted to add the title, like the word title in front of workshop title. So we can do single colon because it gets complicated within Python. So title. And then we can use the string concatenation function, which we done earlier, which is different from Python. You can just put a plus here. You put the 2 strokes and go workshop title. So hopefully this runs with no errors. Oh, and then another thing to note is because we had a cursor in front just now, we don't need to do that because we're not actually getting any data. So you can delete this. Connection dot commit. My brain just lagged for a bit there. So this executes this statement which you want. And we do connection. Oh, did I not close the? Oh yeah, see, I had an error already. I did not close the string and I did not close the bracket. That's where I went wrong. Okay, connection.commit and connection.close. So like remember to commit and close. So this saves the changes and this closes the file which you opened up here. So hopefully you run this with no errors. Oh no. So it shows us an error near workshop title. Oh, I think it's because oh yes. One important thing to note. If you're using 2 lines, always remember to add a space between the lines. Because right now, it's actually writing this and this without a space just now. But this gives you an error because this is one big word now. But remember to add a space there and you have no problems. So I'll go ahead and delete that. Okay, so you have no errors here. We go up here and then we have to reload the database. So we click this small button here next to workshop. You see, we've added title in front of all the workshop titles. So this button is to reload the thing if you've done anything to it. Sorry, there's a couple of questions in here. Let me have a look at them first. Oh, Okay, Augustine being very helpful and help you guys answer the question, so that's fine. All right, so if there's no more questions, any more questions about the Python bit? Because we'll be moving on. Okay, so after this, we'll be actually having a little hands-on practice. So you may be wondering why we have this other database called practice.db. So it's actually just for you guys to practice. So it's, if you open up the database, use DB browser for this, because how you connect DB browser to Python is just running the SQL statements within Python. So we'll practice this in the browser itself. So go ahead and open the practice database, and we will look at the data. It's actually for a school, which is for poly. So you can have a see there's a schools, there's course names, there's gender, and the count, which is the number of students within each course of that gender. And there's also year. So how about we go ahead and do a few practice questions. And I'll go through with you guys slowly after each question. So don't worry if anything happens, because I will go through. So we can just start with the first bit, which is to list the course names that have no more than 50 females in 2016. So I want you guys to try for yourself this question. And if you remember, it's actually a select statement. So I'll go back to that select slide and have you guys have a look. Okay, I'll just copy this. Sorry, let me look for the select. There you go. So I'll paste it below. So y'all can try out this question. And I'll give you guys about like 2-3 minutes to try out. So it's a list the course names that have no more than 50 females in 2016. So any questions, just ask in chat. Any like unless your question is for the answer, but any errors, you can just ask in chat. All right, so I hope you all have finished or tried your best at least. So right now I'll go through the answer. So, let's see. So we wanted to get the course names that have no more than 50 females, right? So it's a select statement. So we go select. Now what we want to select is the course name that we said. So I must ensure that it's the exact same spelling as this. Now when this shows up, you actually can double click on it from enrollment, or you could just press tab for the autofill. So press tab and see it filled enrollment for me. So, and now you might be thinking, oh yeah, just select the course name, but if you run this, you get all the courses. But what we want is actually the ones with no more than 50 females in 2016. So there's two statements here, no more than 50 females, as well as 2016. So it's where, gender, post female. And notice that they spelled out the whole word here, so you can just put F in because it won't work. And year goes to 2016. So 2016 is an integer, so we don't have to put it in inverted commas. So here we get all the courses. We have 58 rows of courses with the females from 2016. So that's quite a simple question. Let's move on to the next part. Find the largest number of males in a particular course in 2016. So if you remember, we had the different functions within SQL that we can use. So I'll put you guys on that page and see if you guys can solve the question. So I'll just go do that. So you guys can try the question again and try using one of the functions to get the largest number of males from the course in 2016. So I'll give you guys another 2 to 3 minutes to try that out again. Oh, wait, I think I used the wrong question. I looked at the, 1 second. Oh yes, you are right. Prakash, very nice, thank you. So I forgot the last statement, which is no more than 50. I read the question, just females in 2016. So it's also and, another and, count. So actually, it's no more than 50. So it's actually less than 50. Less than 50. So here we get 12 rows instead of 48 rows. So yeah, thank you for pointing out to me. Apologies for the mistake, guys. But yeah, there's a count is less than 50 at the end as well. So I'll go back to this question. Oh, where is it? Here. And I'll let you guys try to find the largest number of males in the course in 2016. So I'll give you guys around 1 minute and I'll go through it. Should it be less? Oh yeah, it's less than or equal. Oh my, sorry guys. My brain's not really working very well tonight apparently. Thanks for pointing out. You guys are well done, guys. All right, I think that's about time. So let's go over here and try the question. So we're doing another select statement here. So we can just key that select. But now we're trying to get the number of males. So it's actually getting the count. So we go select count from enrollment. So I'll select count from our table, as well as 2016 and males. So we do where year goes to 2016 and gender. Okay, yeah, gender equals male. Now here, right, you get all the counts, but you realize that that's not actually the output which we desire because we're trying to find the largest number of males. So instead of selecting just count, you go select max count from enrollment with the same statements. Here we get 440 students. So here's the maximum number of students of a course for the males in 2016, and that's 440. So yeah, another quite a short statement for us to try. So let's move on to the next question. Total enrollment in 2017. So it's another one of the functions we have learned above. So I'll give you guys a bit of time to try that out again. So if you want to check your answer, right, don't worry, I'll go through with you guys later. Okay. Actually, my answer might be a bit different from you guys because my database has changed. So let me actually download it again. Because okay. So back to the question, sorry about that. So I think that's enough time again. If you guys need more time, just say in chat, I'll give you a minute or two more. But if not, find the total enrollment in 2017. So what we want to do, it's another select function because we're selecting data from the table. So we go select count, which is the total number of students enrolled, basically, from enrollment. Okay. And as well as in 2017. So you go where goes, yeah, it goes 2017, right? And we're thinking, oh yeah, here you go. But see, we get all the values of count instead of the total count. So how we do that, how we find the total, is actually use the sum functions, which sums all the counts. So we do sum bracket, and we'll get 14,239 students. So that's quite a lot of students. And here's the answer you wanted to check. So you were correct, Hughes. Sorry if I say your name wrong. Yeah, so it's 14,239. So let's go back to the questions. We have 2 more questions and we'll have a Kahoot after this, okay? So there's something to look forward to. List the course names arranged from most to least popular amongst the male students. So if you remember from just now, Augustine told you guys about a very nice function for you guys to list it. So maybe instead of putting it in the slide, I'll let you guys try and remember. And I'll show you guys a slide in 2 minutes time. Just try your best to remember it for now. If not, I'll show you guys the slides. Send the questions through Discord along with the solutions. Ooh, I could send that after the thing is done. If you solutions, as you mean like the code, right? Okay, so I could consolidate that after we're done, and I'll send it to one of the channels. I'm not sure which we can use, but yeah, no worries. All right, so if any of you guys are still stuck with how to arrange it, I'll go and show you guys the slides. Oh, I can show you guys the slides. I'll go up and show you. It's actually the order by function, if you remember. So I'll give you guys 2 more minutes after seeing the slides to finish up this question. All right, so I think that it's about time. So let's go back to our D browser. And of course, there's another select statement. Okay. So we'll list the course names. Okay, so you go course name, right? So course underscore name from enrollment. And what we want is the most to least popular male students, okay. So that's the trick. So you do where gender is male. And now we're going to do in most to least popular, right? So that's actually descending order, right? Because the most is the most number, least is least number. So do order by, and what you want to order it by, which in this case is the count, the number of students, which shows how popular it is. And ASC or DESC. So DESC is a descending order. So this is not very easy to see, right? So let's just go select star from here. You can actually see the count is actually going down slowly and slowly. And we actually change this to ASC, just get ascending order. So start from School of Design with 2 people all the way down to 440 people with the engineering. So this order by is very helpful function to show us. So the final question, it's a bit complicated, but I believe that you guys got it. Update to add 5 students to each course in the School of Design. So I'll leave it here for first, then I'll show you guys the update slides. So you guys can try it for yourselves here first. So I'll give you guys like 2-3 minutes here. And if you're really stuck, I'll show you guys the slides, which will help you out a lot. And I'll go through the question after around 5 minutes. So I'll go and show you guys the update slide. So if you're still a bit stuck with the update statement, don't worry. I'll show you this slide. I'll give you guys 2 more minutes. Then I'll go through this question. All right, so I'd say 2 minutes is up. So I'll go through this question right now. So we're trying to add 5 students to each course in the School of Design. So you see school, it's actually School of Design here. So there's a multiple courses in there. So to add 5 students into each course. So okay, it's not very specific here, but each gender of each course. I'm sorry, you guys got a bit stuck up there. But the statement is update. So using update and the table name. So the table you want to update is actually enrollment. So it's not the school name or the course name first. It's update enrollment first. And we do what we want to change. So we add 5 students into each course, right? So we do set count equals to count plus 5. So it's like Python plus equals, but you can't just do like that because SQL doesn't read it. So just do count equals to count plus 5. And now specifically, we're going to add 5 students into each course of the School of Design. So do where school equals to School of Design. So it's capital S, sorry, and capital D. So must be sure of that. So School of Design. So with that, hopefully that works. So we have a look here first. School of Design, the first one, Diploma in Apparel, has 156 female students. After we run this, hopefully we should see, yeah, see 161 students. So we have successfully added 5 students into this course. So 29, let's try that again. So we're adding 5 more on top of that. Now we have 34. So 166 and 34. So we're adding into every school, every course in School of Design. So hopefully you don't get to, that wasn't a very complicated question. So with that question, we're actually almost at the end of this workshop. But before we end, we actually have a little Kahoot quiz for you guys to test out your knowledge from this workshop. So Augustine actually has that Kahoot on his computer right now, so I'll let him share his screen.
Okay. So it is time for the Kahoot. Let me just start it up. All right. So if you guys are not able to see the pin, I can just send you guys the pin through the Zoom chat. So wait, hold on. Yeah, I'll just give you guys a moment to join in. Okay, I'll give you guys maybe about 1 to 2 more minutes to join in. All right. I'm gonna assume that's everybody. Oh, one guy just left. All right, never mind. All right, let's start. Okay, let's start. So this Kahoot will sort of be like a recap on what we've went through earlier. Okay, so looks like most of you got it right. So once again, to sort of recap, a primary key has to be unique and it cannot be repeated through a table. It is a candidate key. However, the better answer for in this case would be that it is a unique candidate key because candidate keys can be repeated through a table. And yeah, the square, the green one is just completely wrong. Okay, so good job, guys. All right, next question. What does this SQL statement do? All right, so this question may seem a little bit a little bit tricky with so many words, but not to worry. So it does not create a table with the title as its primary key because if we go back to the code and we see, we have actually set the movie ID to be a primary key and not the title. So the first option is wrong. Creates a table movies with title as the foreign key. Now we did not set the title as a foreign key because if we did, we'll have to put in the foreign key constraint for a title. So it is not a foreign key. And the green one again is just completely wrong because as we can see here, there's clearly a primary key because we have set the movie ID as a primary key. So not too bad. Okay, you guys are correct. So good. All right, next, true or false? This should be a fairly simple question. All right, so if you can sort of recall, CRUD actually stands for create, read, update, and delete. It is not drop, it is delete. So this is kind of like a trick question. And I see some of you, if not most of you, have fallen for my trick. Okay, very good job. What object does this code print? I'm not sure if I can zoom in on the code, sorry. It's a little bit small. Okay, I'm assuming most of you got that wrong due to the fact that this is really, really small, and that is my bad. So what this code actually prints, if you guys can see, it's actually a list, as Daniel has mentioned, because we are doing a fetch all, which will return us the data, which is our sort of the data you want to get in a tuple, and there'll be multiple tuples of data in a list. So this will in fact return us a list and not a tuple. And it will not return us a dictionary because yeah, it just won't, sorry. It won't sort of print out a dictionary because this is not I mean it is a dictionary, but yeah, okay. So it won't print out the cursor because we are actually doing a fetch all over here. So it won't just return the cursor. All right. So next. Okay, you guys are really good at this. All right. So what module do you import into Python for SQL? All right, so this is another trick question, but if you recall from what Daniel has sort of taught you guys earlier, you actually use this line of code, import SQLite tree, in order for you to import SQL into Python, and not import SQL or SQLite or database. So yellow is the right answer. Okay. We have new people on the leaderboard. All right. So how do you use an SQL statement in Python? Okay, so if you recall it once again from what Daniel has mentioned, you use this dot execute, and inside these brackets, you can paste in your SQL statement with the inverted commas. So it is not commit because commit is basically just us saving our changes into the database. And it is not connection because connection is basically just connecting our Python to the database itself. And it's not actually how we use an SQL statement. And the read is not even a function in SQL. So yep, execute is the right word. Okay. All right, last question. What does this code return? Oh no, it's a little bit small again. Okay. Okay, so most of you guys have managed to see through our evil intentions. And if you see clearly on this line, it says print cursor. So whatever code you wrote before is redundant because in the end, you're just going to print the word cursor. So this code will actually return the word cursor. Not the names because you did not read each item in the cursor itself. So this will not return the names, and it will not return connection because yeah, why you didn't even print the connection. All right, so it will just return cursor. So that's it for the Kahoot quiz, and let's see who is on top. Okay. Congratulations, Sheng Qian. You are number one. And a huge shout out to the remaining 4 of you and everyone else for participating in our workshop. I'm going to stop screen share now. So thank you for coming and staying on for so long and listening to us, sort of explain to you guys what's SQL.
Sorry, I'm sorry that I see it's 10:25 p.m. right now. I'm sorry that the workshop has dragged on, but before you go, there is a form for you to fill up for you participants. So before you go, please complete this Google form.
I'll show link. I'll show link. Show the
Well, I hope everyone managed to learn something today. After you complete the reflection form, you can go, I guess.
Nice photo.
Daniel and Augustine, if you want to leave, you can also leave. Don't want to drag on too much of the time.
All right, thank
for
you.
presenting
And
again. Thank you. Bye-bye.
thanks for everyone for coming as well. Bye.
Thank you for coming. Bye bye.